I'm Dennis Anderson. Here's what's coming up on Almanac North. The state of Minnesota announced its plan for reopening public school this week. We will have early reaction to the plan and what it means for students and families. The Minnesota Chamber of Commerce is offering real-time information on the state's economic recovery from COVID. And Superior's Fairlawn Mansion and the SS Meteor are reopening to the public, thanks in part to a Community Foundation grant. These stories are next on Almanac North. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thank you very much for watching. Julie Zenner is off as we continue to alternate hosting during the pandemic. This week's show was recorded on Thursday afternoon. Also on Thursday, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz released the state's official guidance for reopening public schools this fall. With COVID-19 cases rising in the state, students and parents have been wondering how classes can safely resume this fall. Here is more from Thursday's announcement.
So today we're going to announce the Safe Learning Plan. And as I said, this is a localized, data-driven approach to making sure that school districts, where it is physically possible to teach our students, we will do that. Where we use the data to drive that decision making, but understanding that county level health data has to be coupled with what the physical plant looks like in that building, what it looks like for your teachers, what are the ages of those teachers, what are the localized situation around COVID-19, and how do we build a planning matrix and a support system that allows us to move through a school year with an understanding we may move from different phases. We may be in classrooms, we may be out of them at certain times, but how do we make sure that the localized situation is being taken into consideration and that safety and learning environment is put forward? The state's responsibility is to use the best knowledge that we have, and we are blessed in Minnesota to have a wide variety of health experts who have been working with school districts, working with our partners at the Minnesota Department of Education to provide that matrix that helps make those decision-making possible, to make sure that when we're doing that, that local school guidance is coupled with the own expertise that are in those school districts, to support them in a manner that does those very simple things, and you'll hear these goals of keeping those students and that staff in that building safe, of understanding which is the best learning model to get the most out of our children, and the flexibility necessary to be able to build a system for the long haul.
School districts and charter schools will be in one of three models: in-person, distance learning, or a hybrid of the two. And this will all be based on local data of viral activity in their region. And the model used may shift based on how the pandemic shifts over time. What's especially important is that schools can make the decision to implement a more restrictive model if they decide to do so. Families with concerns can opt into distance learning even if their district reopens. And teachers and staff must have the option to work remotely. Distance learning was not perfect, and this new plan won't be perfect either. We are relying on the expertise of our public health teams, the compassion of our educators, and the commitment of our communities to make this work. Our littlest Minnesotans are depending on us.
Joining us now with his reaction to the state's plan is Dr. Matt Ridenour, chair of the undergrad education department at the College of St. Scholastica. Doctor, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate you being on the program today. The recommended learning model we learned in that piece from the governor in each district, including ours here in Duluth, will be determined by the number of COVID cases per 10,000 people over a period of 14 days. What do you think of this plan?
So I will say that my initial response was not surprise. I think in recent weeks, the governor and the Minnesota Department of Education and Commissioner Malcolm from MDH have been telegraphing this to a certain extent. And it was also, I think, apparent and clear when recent polls and surveys were released by the Minnesota Teachers Union, Education Minnesota,
Right.
and also the surveys that were conducted by the Minnesota Department of Education, wherein we had some inconsistency in terms of preferences. The Teachers Union, I think a plurality of teachers who responded to that survey expressed an interest in beginning the school year with distance learning, whereas the majority of parents who responded to the MDE survey expressed a desire to see students back to school. As a result, with people across the board and with people in the state, counties in the state, districts in the state experiencing COVID infection rates at a different level, it made sense to have an approach like this. Therefore, it was not a surprise.
Do you think the governor and Lieutenant Governor Matt put some people at ease who might be afraid to either go to work in the schools, staff, teachers, or parents sending their children there?
I think this plan is not without its concern, and so I don't want to minimize or set aside concern that people may have. I think if you live in Hennepin County right now, you've got a different response than in St. Louis County. I checked today, and given the metrics that the governor and MDE and MDH reported, at this point, the most recent numbers suggest that we would fall, St. Louis County and the Northland would fall within the range of having students in person in classes, whereas Hennepin County is outside of that range. So to your question, I think it's increased anxiety in some parts of the state and decreased anxiety in other parts. I do want to note and highlight that the governor was clear that these are suggestions and not a mandate. And so those ranges, those 5 ranges that your viewers will see are simply a starting point for conversations between the superintendent and school board and other stakeholders.
When I was watching what they were saying down in St. Paul, I got the feeling that no matter where you live, what school district you live in, this is going to be very fluid. I mean, in each community, it could change overnight.
By nature, it has to be. I think the nature of COVID is that we have overnight an increased number of cases. Take, for example, St. Louis County today reported 18 cases, which is a record number for us, whereas cases had been on the decline in recent days. And so the nature of the pandemic requires a flexible plan. I think that's what the governor and other stakeholders have given us.
Traditionally, I would suspect that in-class learning does better for the student. They learn better if they're actually in class with teachers, other kids, than staying at home watching a computer. There's
no doubt, and I don't think I've talked with an educator or an administrator who prefers distance learning, at least for children, over seated instruction. And I think we also have to recognize the fact that Minnesota is of concern relative to our opportunity and achievement gap in this state. Students of color, our indigenous students, students from lower socioeconomic strata are experiencing education in a different way here. The consequence of which in a pandemic is that it's just exacerbated. And so for those reasons too, the preference of course is to have students in seated instruction with teachers who are doing what they were trained to do.
Doctor, you have students in local schools. Do you feel that they'll be safe in the school?
I think the word safe is a difficult one. I think I was a whitewater rafting and mountaineering guide for many years, and we avoided the word safe. Instead, we talked about managing risk. And I feel comfortable that given the training and the work that's been done in our local districts, I feel comfortable in saying that teachers and administrators, superintendents, and school boards are doing the work to manage the risk.
What kind of feedback do you think the governor and lieutenant governor have been getting from teachers across the state and from parents in the state?
I listened today as teachers and parents responded on social media and other places to the governor's plan, and I think it's across the board, right? And again, I think it's probably has a fair amount to do with where you live and what your experience with school has been up to this point. But I have no doubt that they've taken into consideration those voices. And I know that now, as that responsibility and that decision making is delegated to local authorities, I certainly hope that they'll listen to their constituency as well.
Part of the enjoyment of going to school is being able to connect with extracurricular activities, sports, other things, theater. Is that gone for a while?
Well, we do know, of course, that school is the context in which social relationships begin, and we know that learning is a social thing in many ways, in terms of the relationship between a teacher and a student, and also in terms of the relationships that are developed between students. I, in my own life with my own children, have noticed that we've begun to find alternatives for that. And so I prefer to think about it not as gone as much as creative solutions are born out of difficult situations. With that said, certainly a return to school, even if in this county and in the Northland in particular, students return to seated instruction, it won't look the same. We know certain co-curricular, extracurricular activities won't be able to happen, or maybe pushed to different times.
And things may change the moment they leave the house. I'm thinking in terms of maybe school busing. There has to be social distancing, i.e. less kids on school buses.
Without a doubt, and this is both a cost concern and a health concern first, but a cost concern second. A recent study noted that probably the most safe form of busing students is one student in each row, alternating seats and diagonally distant. That means that in a bus that may have typically seated 72 to 77 students, you can have just a handful, maybe over a dozen. So there are transportation concerns on top of this. And that's why, again, back to this idea that the governor is offering this as a baseline for decision making, considering that there may be financial issues and others that complicate the decision.
Yeah, it'll be a big thing when school reopens here in both Minnesota and Wisconsin this fall. Dr. Matt Ridenour, thank you very kindly.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. The Minnesota Chamber Foundation says the state is starting to show signs of economic recovery from the shock of COVID-19. The foundation this week launched an online dashboard providing real-time updates on the Minnesota economy. Almanac North producer Greg Grell talked with Sean O'Neill, the Chamber's Director of Economic Research, about the dashboard.
We recognize that in this time, there's often a lag in data availability. So state and federal government agencies will collect official data on employment and other kinds of economic activity, but often that information might take a month or so to really be processed and released. And so we wanted a dashboard that could help businesses, policymakers, anyone else in the public be able to see how is Minnesota's economic recovery taking place, both within those official economic data measurements, but also leveraging some perhaps more novel uses of data from private sources that look at things like job postings, online job postings, web traffic to home real estate websites, consumer mobility, looking at foot traffic to different types of locations, so that we can understand what kind of behaviors are taking place in a more real-time fashion that will have potentially implications for our economic outcomes in the coming months.
So right now it shows the state of Minnesota doing relatively well unemployment-wise, that we're not doing so bad as far as the nation goes.
Yeah, you know, an underlying strength of Minnesota's economy is that whether in at the top or bottom of a business cycle, Minnesota typically has a lower unemployment rate than these as a whole. So if you go back, looking at past decades through the 1970s onward, Minnesota typically has an unemployment rate that is significantly below the U.S. average. So that helps us in these times where you have spiking unemployment, particularly in certain sectors. In this case, leisure and hospitality, healthcare, travel-oriented businesses. Those have really been hit hard. And you've seen states like Michigan or Nevada or Hawaii that are really concentrated in those sectors. You've seen unemployment rates spike for those states. Minnesota has a very diverse economy, so we're able to sometimes buffer industry downturns better than other states. And it's been a strength in this case too, that while our unemployment really did significantly increase up, we peaked at around 9.9% last month. It has not reached the levels that we've seen in states that have been hit the hardest throughout this time.
Now, northern Minnesota, which is a bit more tourism dependent, those numbers aren't quite as good here in northern Minnesota. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and that's what we see in the dashboard as well. So we show unemployment rate by county on a map, and you can scroll around the map and look at the unemployment rate around different parts of the state. And certainly in northern Minnesota, counties like Itasca, Lake, others that have a larger tourism industry. Certainly our mining industry has seen substantial job losses. Healthcare is such a huge industry in this region, in northeast Minnesota. Job losses have been more severe than in the state as a whole. So we do see the kind of structure and composition of our regional economies plays a big factor in how they're experiencing this downturn.
We're talking with Sean O'Neill, the Director of Economic Research with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. And Sean, one of the things you pointed out in your release this week about announcing the dashboard is that Minnesota's employment is, quote, disproportionately concentrated in several sectors. Talk a little bit about that and what is concerning or maybe not concerning about that.
Yeah, I think overall we see Minnesota's economic structure as a strength. We have above average shares of jobs in sectors like manufacturing, healthcare, corporate headquarters, finance and insurance, some other key industries that tend to really drive productivity, have above average wages, and contribute to Minnesota's strong economy. So we view our strength in those sectors as a strength overall for Minnesota. Again, looking at some of the industries that have been hit the hardest through the COVID-19 pandemic, we have a below average share of jobs statewide in accommodation and food service, other industries of leisure and hospitality and travel oriented businesses. So we've been a little bit more shielded from the worst of our impacts related to COVID-19 and really leaned on some of our strengths in those other sectors.
Now, you've been noting an uptick in foot traffic. Why is that important as you see the recovery continuing here?
Yeah, I think it's important because right now consumer activity is really driving our economic activity. And so understanding the rate at which people are traveling and visiting different kinds of businesses and establishments will give us a clue of what we might expect from sales and economic output in those types of businesses. So it gives us maybe a little bit of a preview into what's happening within industries that have seen a large decrease in volume of foot traffic into their businesses.
Now, going forward, Sean, how do you see this information that the Chamber is sharing being valuable as we continue our economic recovery in Minnesota?
We want to make it available to everyone by having it accessible on our website, but we'll also be digging into these metrics and doing some analysis ourselves to be able to track how these indicators are really shaping our economic performance, and to go deeper, to use these as a starting place, and to try to ask experts in the field in certain issue areas, or ask businesses within certain industries what they're seeing and how they think these indicators play a role in our economic recovery. So for us, it's both a tool for the public at large to use and learn from. It's a tool for ourselves to be able to learn more about our economy, and then hopefully take steps to improve our economic performance in the coming months.
Well, we'll all be watching closely. Sean O'Neill with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Greg.
Well, the pandemic has certainly impacted all facets of daily life, but each week there are more signs of a slow return to normalcy. In Superior, the city's public museums are inviting guests back for tours with new protocols in place. The reopening was made possible in part with the grant from the Duluth Superior Area Community Foundation. Here to tell us more is Megan Meyer, Executive Director of the museums, which include Fairlawn Mansion and the SS Meteor. Welcome. Thanks, Megan, for being here. Tell us a little bit about the money and how the Community Foundation helped reopen these beautiful museums.
Yeah, so we got a $3,000 grant, and that grant was used to update some plumbing at the SS Meteor in the bathrooms. We also used it to deep clean the carpets at Fairlawn. They were installed during the restoration in the 90s, so they were in need of some cleaning, and we figured now was the perfect time to get it fully sanitized for our guests to come in. It was also used to do some additional deep cleaning within the gift shop. We had to do some rearranging, get a new desk for our staff and guests. That way it was much more open when guests walked in, and they could socially distance as well.
I mentioned that there are some new protocols in order to visit the museums. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we sanitize in between each tour. And then we are also limiting the amount of guests on each tour. Just because of the limited spaces, especially at the SS Meteor, we wanted to make sure that our staff can socially distance from the guests. And we're requiring that the guests come within the same group of people that they know. So it's essentially a private tour for our guests. We also incorporated online bookings, so to make it easier for people to guarantee their tour time.
So if somebody wants to take a tour, then do you need a few days' notice, or how would that work?
Nope, so we're still allowing walk-ins. So just the easiest is just check our website. You can book up to 14 days in advance, actually, which is kind of cool. So if you know you're coming to town, you can get your day planned.
Fairlawn is an absolutely gorgeous mansion, huge home. Do you get repeat tours?
We do, actually. We get a lot of people that like coming back. We do change things. Unfortunately, right now, because of the pandemic, we have the back section of the home off, but closed off. But actually, that's allowing us to update a couple of rooms that will be open on the tour eventually. So that's pretty exciting that it's allowing us to make some of these changes too. But we change exhibits. Each tour guide has their own little take on the tours, so each experience is a little bit different. And you notice different things too.
Now there's also a police and fire hall museum. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the old Firehouse and Police Museum is actually under construction right now, so that's why it's only open by appointment. That's because we're having the captain's bedroom completely renovated. We're having the plaster walls completely refixed and painted back to the colors of what it was originally, as we've discovered that during the restoration. We're also doing, the police department's doing some work in the police room as well. So we're really excited for the changes going on there.
What might be involved in a museum like that? What kind of displays would you find?
Yeah, so actually the firehouse is home to the Wisconsin Hall of Fame for police and fire. So that's kind of a really cool asset that we have right in Superior. We have fire rigs there. We have 3 downstairs. And then upstairs there's a bunch of different tools that they use, clothes kids can check out, and all different sorts of firefighting equipment and police equipment.
Now, how long have you been in possession of the fire hall? Has it been a part of the museum scene in Superior for several years, maybe a couple of decades?
Yeah, so it's actually been, Superior Public Museums was formed in 2000. I see. So all 3 sites were taken under Superior Public Museums at that time.
Are you getting a good response on a normal summer to the Meteor?
Yeah, the Meteor is actually our most unique and important museum that we do have, since it is the very last whaleback that was built, or the very last whaleback in existence that was built by Alexander McDougall. And it has a very unique shape to it and design. So it's pretty awesome to tour.
That's an interesting vessel. I know we've got some pictures here of the Meteor. I've only been on it once several years ago, but when you walk through it, you wonder, my goodness, this sailed that big sea that we call Lake Superior? Because by today's standards, this is a small vessel.
Oh, yeah, very much so. But it is so unique, and Alexander McDougall was such a fascinating shipbuilder. And it's really cool that it's actually docked right down from where it was built, because that was built, his shipyard is now Fraser Shipyard.
How do you advertise the museums?
Yep, so we have our website, we have social media. Last year we had a commercial go out. We're in all the local tour books as well.
And so when you do these kinds of promotions, do you normally find that you're getting people from a fairly wide area who are thinking of spending some time in the Twin Ports?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Greater Wisconsin and Greater Minnesota, like the Twin Cities, Madison area are big. We get a lot of locals too, but we get people from all over the country visiting.
Now, the Whaleback is open?
Yep, the Whaleback's open. That one opened June 15th. That's private tours as well. And something else we added this summer, which is going really well, is that Thursday, Friday, and Saturday we have night tours starting at 4:30, and the last one's at 7:30. So it's a pretty cool time to check out the meteor, and it's a little bit cooler in there too.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So the museums are open, and you invite people to come on in and enjoy a piece of Superior's history.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a
Megan,
great time to
I
visit.
can't thank you enough for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you for
All
having
right,
me.
you bet. Stay in touch with Almanac North while you're out visiting local attractions. You can also follow us on social media if you happen to miss a show. You will find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and visit the WDSC website for program updates, upcoming events, and more information about the station. And don't forget to download the PBS video app for on-demand viewing of your favorite programs, including Almanac North. And thanks to our guests and the crew here in the studio. I'm Dennis Anderson. Stay healthy, everyone, and be kind.